The Unbelievable Kidnapping of Freddy Heineken. In the chilly autumn of 1983, Alfred Freddy Heineken was one of the most powerful, influential, and recognizable tycoons on the European continent. As the charismatic driving force and principal shareholder of the Heineken beer empire, his face was inextricably linked to a global brand that symbolized Dutch industrial triumph and unparalleled commercial success. He was a billionaire who moved through the world with the absolute confidence of a man protected by immense wealth, high society connections, and a fiercely loyal inner circle. But on the dark evening of November 9, 1983, outside his corporate headquarters in the heart of Amsterdam, that illusion of absolute security vanished in a matter of seconds. What followed would become the most notorious, meticulously planned, and psychologically harrowing kidnapping in modern European history, a high-stakes criminal drama that pushed a multi-billion-dollar dynasty to its absolute breaking point. The masterminds behind the operation were not hardened, international terrorists or seasoned mafiosi from traditional criminal networks. Instead, they were a tight-knit group of 5 young, ambitious working-class men from the gritty suburbs of Amsterdam: Cor van Hout, Willem Holleder, Frans Meyer, Jan Boellard, and Martin Urkamps. Driven by a volatile cocktail of financial desperation and sheer criminal arrogance, this group did not want a quick street score. They wanted a historic payout that would set them up for multiple lifetimes. They understood that to successfully extort one of the world's wealthiest families, they could not rely on chaotic, impulsive tactics. They needed to treat the kidnapping like a highly sophisticated corporate enterprise. For more than 2 years, the gang operated in complete secrecy, meticulously tracking Freddy Heineken's daily routines, studying his personal security vulnerabilities, and slowly building the specialized infrastructure required to hold a global billionaire hostage right under the noses of the Dutch authorities. The cornerstone of their operation was the absolute isolation of their target, which required a brilliant piece of deceptive engineering. The conspirators owned a seemingly mundane wood manufacturing and logistics warehouse located in the bleak industrial sector of Westpoort, an area heavily trafficked by loud machinery and massive commercial trucks. Deep within the cavernous interior of this active business, behind temporary drywalls and stacks of raw timber, Jan Boellard constructed 2 highly specialized, soundproof cells. These hidden chambers were completely invisible to any casual visitor or delivery driver entering the facility. Boellard installed reinforced steel doors, chemical toilets, hidden ventilation shafts, and a complex system of acoustic dampening materials designed to ensure that even a desperate, full-throated scream would be completely swallowed by the industrial noise of the surrounding area. They were building a high-security black site disguised as a standard commercial warehouse, ensuring total control over their victim before they ever laid a finger on him. On November 9, as the clock ticked towards 6:56 p.m., Freddy Heineken walked out of his corporate office building alongside his trusted personal driver, Abder Doderer. The street was quiet, wrapped in the cold evening fog typical of an Amsterdam autumn. Before they could reach the safety of Heineken's armored limousine, a heavily modified delivery van screeched to a halt directly in front of them. Multiple masked men, wielding automatic weapons, burst from the vehicle with military precision. Within a span of less than 30 seconds, both Heineken and Doderer were violently overpowered, shoved into the back of the van, and bound with heavy chains. The perpetrators executed the ambush with such blistering speed and aggressive coordination that bystanders barely comprehended what had occurred. By the time the local police departments received the initial emergency calls, the van was already weaving through the complex web of Amsterdam's outer highways, carrying the crown jewel of European industry into complete darkness. When Freddy Heineken was pushed into his cramped, cold concrete cell at the Westpoort warehouse, the psychological warfare began immediately. The kidnappers stripped the billionaire of his expensive tailored clothing, forcing him into a standard-issue, demeaning track suit. They cut off all physical contact with the outside world, refusing to speak to him directly. When they had to interact with their prisoner to deliver food or basic necessities, they wore elaborate masks and used electronic voice distortion devices to maintain absolute anonymity. Heineken, a man accustomed to luxury and instantaneous obedience from thousands of global employees, suddenly found himself trapped in a soundproof tomb, handcuffed to a wall, completely dependent on the erratic whims of faceless captors. The psychological shock was immense, But Heineken's sharp business mind did not shut down. He immediately began executing cognitive survival strategies, attempting to converse with his captors, note environmental sounds, and mentally map the timeline of his confinement to maintain his sanity. Outside the walls of the warehouse, the Netherlands was thrown into an unprecedented state of national panic. The Dutch government, recognizing the geopolitical and economic implications of a top industrialist being taken by an unknown force, mobilized a massive elite task force. However, the kidnappers had anticipated the state's aggressive response and intentionally instituted a policy of absolute radio silence during the initial phase of the investigation. They refused to issue immediate demands, leaving the Heineken family, the corporate board of directors, and the police force to stew in an agonizing vacuum of information for days. This calculated silence was designed to break the psychological resolve of the family and make them far more compliant when the financial demands were finally delivered. The police were forced to sort through thousands of false leads, dead ends, and public rumors while the country watched the unfolding crisis with bated breath. When the silence was finally broken, the criminal gang introduced a highly complex, sophisticated communication apparatus designed to make electronic tracking completely impossible for the authorities. Instead of using standard telephone lines or direct mail, they utilized a web of coded classified advertisements in national newspapers and forced the police to participate in a series of high-speed, multi-city dead drops. The ransom demand was staggering, 35 million Dutch guilders, an amount equivalent to roughly 16 to 20 million US dollars at the time, which represented the largest single ransom demand in recorded history up to that point. To prove that Heineken and Doderer were still alive, the gang forced the billionaire to record dynamic audio proofs of life, reading specific headlines from current newspapers while his voice cracked with exhaustion and distress. The emotional toll on the Heineken family was devastating, and pressure began mounting from corporate stakeholders to bypass the stalling police strategy and pay the historic sum immediately. The actual delivery of the ransom became a masterclass in criminal evasion and logistics. The kidnappers forced a designated police courier to drive a specific route across the Dutch highway system, guided by a sequence of hidden instructions hidden at random rest stops. The final drop point was located on a secluded highway overpass near the city of Utrecht. The courier was ordered to drop the massive payload, which filled multiple specially modified, heavy-duty duffel bags containing hundreds of thousands of unmarked banknotes, through a specific slot in the bridge's pedestrian walkway. Waiting directly below the overpass, completely hidden by the pitch-black night, the kidnappers caught the falling bags and instantly loaded them into a pre-positioned getaway vehicle. Before the police could coordinate their perimeter units or deploy air support, the gang had vanished into the network of back roads, leaving the authorities completely empty-handed and humiliated. With the historic ransom successfully secured, the dynamic of the crime shifted dramatically. The kidnappers had originally promised to release Freddy Heineken and Abder Doderer immediately upon receipt of the funds. However, greed and internal paranoia began to fracture the group's unity. A massive logistical challenge now faced them: how to launder and conceal millions of guilders in unmarked cash while being the targets of the most intensive international manhunt in European history. Instead of returning to the warehouse to free their captives, several members of the gang panicked, choosing to stash their shares of the cash in plastic containers buried deep within the sandy soils of the publicized woods, while others began preparing immediate escape plans to flee the jurisdiction of the Dutch legal system entirely. Freddy Heineken and his driver were left locked in their soundproof cells, completely unaware that the money had been paid, facing the very real and terrifying possibility that they would be abandoned to starve to death in their hidden vault. The breakthrough that cracked the case wide open did not come from a brilliant piece of forensic deduction, but from an anonymous tip delivered to the police lines. An observant citizen had noticed suspicious, late-night luxury vehicle movements around the supposedly dormant Westpoort wood warehouse in the weeks leading up to the kidnapping. Armed with this critical geographic lead, an elite, heavily armed police tactical unit executed a massive, synchronized raid on the industrial facility on November 30, 1983, exactly 3 weeks after the initial abduction. When the officers breached the warehouse, they initially found nothing but stacks of timber and industrial machinery. However, using advanced thermal imaging and structural measurements, they quickly identified the false drywall barrier. officers smashed through the reinforced brickwork, breached the heavy steel doors, and discovered Freddy Heineken and Abder Doderer chained inside the freezing chambers. Though visibly emaciated, exhausted, and deeply traumatized by the 21 days of sensory deprivation, both men were alive. The rescue of the tycoon was a triumph for the nation, but the battle was only half won. The perpetrators were now in full flight. Cor Van Hout and Willem Holleder had managed to cross the border into France, initiating an intricate, years-long legal and diplomatic chess match. Because of complex gaps in the existing extradition treaties between France and the Netherlands regarding extortion laws, the duo could not be immediately sent back to Amsterdam to face trial. They were placed under various forms of house arrest and city confinement in Paris and various French territories, living a surreal existence as international fugitives while their lawyers fought the Dutch government in international courts. Eventually, the legal loopholes were closed, and both men were extradited back to their homeland, where they, alongside their co-conspirators, were sentenced to lengthy terms in high-security prisons. The state eventually recovered a significant portion of the buried ransom money, but millions remained unaccounted for, absorbed into the global black market. The psychological scars of the ordeal permanently altered the trajectory of Freddy Heineken's life and the security protocols of global elites. Upon his release, the once gregarious tycoon became deeply reclusive, withdrawing from the public eye and transforming his personal estate into an absolute fortress. He invested millions in pioneering private security infrastructure, bulletproof vehicles, and advanced personal protection details, establishing a blueprint for corporate security that is still utilized by international executives today. The kidnapping also inadvertently created a dark legacy within the Dutch underworld. Upon their eventual release from prison, members of the gang, particularly Willem Holleder, used their historic notoriety and the unrecovered ransom capital to ascend to the absolute top of the domestic organized crime hierarchy, dominating the European drug trade for decades. The unbelievable abduction of Freddy Heineken was more than just a spectacular true crime event. It was a profound historical turning point that exposed the deep vulnerabilities of wealth, reshaped international law enforcement, and proved that even the most powerful industrial empires can be brought to their knees by a calculated exploit in their security matrix. If you enjoyed this audio article, make sure to subscribe to the We the People channel so that you will never miss a brand new release whenever it gets dropped.